William Butler Yeats, W.B. Yeats, is a poet whose poetry stretches across the whole period of late Victorian and early modern age. So Yeats' poetry is marked for changes during these years. He is introduced as a late romantic poet, or self-consciously romantic. Second, he is introduced as the nationalist or Irish nationalist poet. And third, he is introduced as a modernist poet like T.S. Eliot and Ezra Pound. So there are three main stages to Yeats' development as a poet, and that's between 1885 to 1939 when he died. At the first phase, Yeats was associated with the aesthetic movement of 1890s, and he was impressed by aesthetic notions of the time. And there was another idea that's called Celtic twilight or Celtic twilight. Actually, Celt or cult, they are the ancient people of Western Europe. And they had the same language, I mean, they shared their language and culture. And language is called cult or Celt. And these people, they migrated to present day Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and a smaller town of England that is called Cornwall. And they continued to evolve, particularly in Ireland. Irish people are more proud of their cultic heritage and their cult ancestors, and they try to revive their myth. They also believe that their Gaelic language, Gaelic is a nationalist language of Ireland. They believe that their Gaelic language is extension of or expansion of Celtic language. So W.B. Yeats was attracted in 1890s aesthetic movement of 1890s and the Celtic twilight. He was, we can say, a romantic in his own way. We have already discussed romantic poets. They were attracted towards medieval age, medieval chivalry, particularly Coleridge and John Keats. Keats was attracted towards Hellenism or Greek society, myths, culture, and they were attracted towards East, like Byron, and somehow Shelley too. And they were attracted towards revolution, like Shelley, Coleridge, Wordsworth. And as a romantic poet, W.B. Yeats was interested in native myth of Ireland or Celtic origin of Ireland. So Yeats' poetry is sometimes based on Irish myths and folklore and has a mystical, dreamlike quality. So, because of mysticism, because of dreamlike quality, that is a romantic poetry. And because of attraction towards Irish myth instead of medieval European myth that was focus of romantic poets like Yates, Coleridge and Keats. A key early poem is The Lake Isle of Ends Free, a poem of idealistic escape which dates from Yeats' stay in London in 1890. Yeats belonged to Ireland and also its cities like Sligo and Dublin, but he was not Irish Catholic. He was Irish Protestant. So he had some, you can say, differences with his countrymen. Second phase of Yeats' poetry was dominated by his commitment to Irish nationalism. And that's the time when Irish movement was moving towards its peak, and peak was the year of 1916. 1916 is the year of revolt of Ireland against Britain, and that resulted in 5-year militant struggle. And in 1921, Ireland was divided into two parts: Northern Ireland, that contains only 6 counties at that time, present day these are 8, and the rest of the 26 counties where Irish Catholics were in majority, they formed an independent state that is called the Republic of Ireland. तो 1916 में जो स्ट्रगल शुरू हुई थी उसका कल्मिनेशन 1921 में रिपब्लिक ऑफ आयरलैंड के एक इंडिपेंडेंट स्टेट बनने की सूरत में सामने आया. So at second phase, Yates was attracted towards Irish nationalism and he showed commitment for that cause. Irish nationalism was first seen in search of a consistently simpler, popular, and more accessible style. Yeats became more and more involved in public nationalist issues, so his poetry became more public and concerned with the politics of the modern Irish state. He was also member of the movement, or you can say literary movement or theatrical movement of Lady Gregory and her Abbey Theatre. And purpose was to revive Irish culture, Irish myth, and support Irish nationalism. When Yeats wrote his famous poem, Easter 1960, he describes the Easter Rising of 1916. That's the year, that's the Easter of the same year when Irish nationalists launched a heroic but unsuccessful revolt against the British government. And that's the revolt where Major Robert, the son of Lady Gregory, was killed. A number of the rebels who were known to Yeats personally were executed. So the callous and unfeeling treatment of the uprising or revolt moved Yeats to deep anger. and bitterness. यानी सेकंड फेज है जिसमें आयरिश नेशनलिज्म और सेकंड कमिंग जैसी वंडरफुल और मास्टरपीसेस क्रिएट किए गए। यह वो स्टेज है जब आयरिश नेशनलिज्म की वॉइस स्ट्रॉन्ग थी एंड Yeats supported that voice. His poetry is simpler, colloquial, popular, accessible when it belongs to second phase, that is phase of Irish nationalism. Yeats recognized that cause of violence, disorder and repression are complex and have to be confronted and understood. I mean, there is not one cause, that one militant move is there or one uprising is there. It has historical roots. It has cultural roots. Then he wrote his work that is called The Second Coming. That's the vision of impending death and dissolution. Second Coming is the famous poem that contains these two lines: things fall apart, the center cannot hold, mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. These two lines actually describe postmodern condition in the West. These two lines also project the state of human being during the world wars. These two lines are also used to describe condition of the post-colonial people. Nigerian novelist Chinua Achebe, he wrote a famous novel using the same phrase, things fall apart. But in Yeats' vision, dissolution is part of a cycle of history which also guarantees order, joy, and beauty. There is gaiety and celebration in Yeats' poetry, as well as terror and fear of anarchy. So, two opposite strains are there. On one side, there is terror, fear, and on the other side, there is celebration and joy. Refrain means repeating line. Any line that is repeated in a poem, that is called refrain. Refrain of Easter 1916 is that a terrible beauty is born. A terrible beauty is born is refrain of the poem Easter 1916. Terrible beauty is an example of oxymoron because terrible contradicts beauty. Terror and beauty are contraries, yet a recognition of the essentially cyclical nature of life. Actually, cyclical nature of life and cycle of life are cycle of history. That is part of W.B. Yeats' vision. Yeats wrote a prose book and its title is The Vision. In that book, he presented his, you can say, solitary or mystic vision of history. And he used the image of Gair to describe his vision. गायर को आप यूं समझो जैसे कोन शेप होती है, तो अगर दो कोन के जो नोक वाले सिरे हैं और उनको मिला के खड़ा किया जाए तो जो शेप बनेगी वो गायर है. Two cones are joined from their top or pin, and then a shape is created that is called gyre. And according to W.B. Yeats, there are broader ideas or things are in fashion and gradually they reduce. यानी एक बड़ी बात जो है वो आहिस्ता आहिस्ता रिड्यूस होते होते एक नॉन एग्जिस्टेंट पॉइंट पर पहुंचती है जो एक कोन के सिरे की तरह है, नोक की तरह है, और वहां से उसका रिवर्स पॉइंट शुरू होता है, यानी वो खत्म नहीं होती बल्कि उसका दोबारा से रिवाइवल शुरू हो जाता है। यानी कोई चीज घटते 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 हम कह सकते हैं कि 1% पे पहुंच जाती है, लेकिन जीरो नहीं होती बल्कि 1% से उसका दोबारा रिवाइवल शुरू होता है और वो बढ़ते बढ़ते फिर 100% पे पहुंच जाती है। जब 100% पे पहुंचेगी तो अगेन वही प्रोसेस होगा, उसका डिक्लाइन शुरू हो जाएगा और फिर वो रिवर्स की तरफ जो है वो जाएगी। तो गायर इज द शेप that describe W.B. Yeats' personal, mystic, esoteric vision. And he interpreted the whole history on these lines and made certain prophecies. इसी गायर की बुनियाद पर येट्स ने कुछ प्रोफेसीज की। एक छोटी सी बात का वैसे ही जिक्र कर रहा हूं। बीए में एक ऐसे है माय ग्रैंडफादर that has been taken from autobiography of W.B. Yeats, and in this essay we come to know that one of Yeats' maternal uncle was interested in magic and he was a magician, we can say by profession, and Yeats was also great magician. He learned the art of magic. So, under the influence of magic, mysticism, and his own vision of history, he made prophecies. Some of the prophecies proved true, and some or many of them proved wrong. When the prophecies were proved wrong, it was difficult for him to defend his vision so accurately. क्योंकि उसने वो चीजों को इस तरह से डिवाइड किया था कि एक फिनोमिनन शुरू होता है और फिर जो है वो अपने क्लाइमेक्स पर पहुंचता है और क्लाइमेक्स से दोबारा जो डिक्रीज होता है, खत्म होने के करीब होता है, फिर दोबारा उसका रिवाइवल शुरू हो जाता है। तो ये इसकी वजह से इन येट्स पोइट्री देयर इज अ साइकिल but there is no end. So Yeats tried to write the things on that pattern. He shares personal vision, he shares Irish mythology, he shares Christian symbols and allusions. And we can see his poetry can be read at several levels. It is not surprising that Yeats' poetry contains many images of winding staircases, gyres, spinning tops, and spirals. इन सब में जो कॉमन बात है वो ये है कि कोई चीज सीधी लीनियर मूवमेंट के साथ आगे नहीं बढ़ती, बल्कि जब वो आगे बढ़ती है तो वो पीछे भी आती है और फिर दोबारा एक स्पीड पकड़ के अगली तरफ जाती है। तो इस तरह के इमेज यूज किए गए। He developed an elaborate symbolic system which was private to him in certain particulars drawn from tradition of esoteric thought, which almost compensated for a lost religion. But his greatness as a poet lies in communicating both precisely and evocatively to readers who may know nothing of his resources. तो येट्स की पोइट्री को कहते हैं कि अंडरस्टैंड करने के लिए आपको उस येट्स की प्रोज बुक द विजन को पढ़ना चाहिए और उसके जो गायर के सिंबल पे जो विजन बेस किया हुआ है उसको अंडरस्टैंड करके पोइट्री को इंटरप्रेट करना चाहिए। लेकिन हम देखते हैं कि येट्स की पोइट्री इस लिहाज से मल्टी लेयर्ड है कि अगर किसी को गायर के बारे में कुछ इल्म ना हो तब भी येट्स की पोइट्री को एंजॉय कर सकता है। उसके अंदर एक ऐसा एसेंस है, उसके अंदर एक ऐसी खूबसूरती और ब्यूटी है। जबकि अगर आयरिश कॉन्टेक्स्ट को और येट्स के विजन को पढ़ के किया जाए तो शायद पोइट्री और अनरिच तो हो सकती है, लेकिन ये नहीं है कि या तो वो पोइट्री को स्पॉइल करे या फिर पोइट्री जो है उस विजन की एब्सेंस में, आयरिश नेशनलिज्म की एब्सेंस में पढ़ा ही ना जा सके। Between the First World War and 1930, the most significant volumes Yeats published include The Wild Swans and Pool. Michael Roberts is Lady Gregory's son. Michael Roberts and the Dancer, these are actually the young men who were actually executed because they revolted against the British Empire or Britain. The Tower, that is thought his masterpiece, The Winding Stair. Yeats handles themes of age and myth in a poem, such as sailing to Byzantium, sailing to Byzantium. These are famous poems taken from The Tower and written by W.B. Yeats. The poet returns to the holy city of Byzantium as a symbol of artistic or creative perfection. So we can say Byzantium stands for embodiment of his idealism where he wishes to return. The concern with the passing of time, a major concern in many modernist writers, becomes clear in poem last line, which speaks of what is past or passing or to come. So that's time past, time present, that cannot be separated. Whatever is in Eliot poetry, that is in Yeats in this way of what is past or passing or to come. In the final phase of his career as poet, Yeats reconciles elements from both his earlier periods, fusing them into a mature lyricism. The poetry is less public and more personal. He develops his theories of contraries and of the progression. Contraries and progression, these are the theories which are described in his vision, which can result from reconciling them. But he also writes about the eternity of art. So eternity of art is the point on which Yeats has shared the views of John Keats. Later poems of W.B. Yeats explore contrast between physical and spiritual dimensions of life, between sensuality and rationality, between turbulence and calm. Yeats' often remembered poem among school children that has been borrowed from The Tower, sometime included in syllabus. Here is a speaker is a 60-year-old smiling public man. And when he visits a school, he recollects his memory. So Yeats, who after establishment of Republic of Ireland became a senator in the upper house of Ireland, his own uncertainties dominate the later poems, and his final words in Underband Vulban, when he instructs the younger generation of Irish writers, Irish poets, learn your trade, sing whatever is well made. So we can say his uh, last poems reflect his vision that they should create best poetry, sing whatever is well made. Well made is focus, and they should be proud of their Irish identity, myth, and culture. Like T.S. Eliot, Yeats creates a modern idiom for poetry, particularly in meaning, merging formal and colloquial style. So that blend of formal and colloquial style that is shared with T.S. Eliot and some other modern poets. He adheres more strictly to traditional forms than Eliot and is more comfortable than his contemporary with the direct expression of a personal self or romantic. Yeats is less ironic and less distrustful of romanticism than Eliot. I mean, particularly his earlier poetry that was of a romantic and later poetry was of modernist, but he was not so bitter critic of romantic poetry as T.S. Eliot was, because T.S. Eliot was against personal poetry, subjective poetry, and he didn't like romantic poetry. So W.B. Yeats, he emerges as a significant poet of modern age who shares tradition with Victorian romantic voices. They speak through his poetry, especially early poetry. He is remembered for his Irish nationalism, and he makes experiments like modernist using colloquial idiom and contemporary imagery. He is superb in many ways, but I would like to say a few words about his poem Politics that is taught at graduation level. We can see that this poem has a quote of a philosopher, Thomas Mann, who thinks that that's politics that shapes destiny in modern age, and destiny of man is expressed in political idiom in that age. Yeats quotes the philosopher and then he writes and shows a conflict between the feelings of the speaker and his rational voice. His rational voice asks him to pay attention to laws, politics, wisdom of traveling Jew, and his inner voice persuades him to pay attention to the girl and hold her in his arms. So, surface level पर there is a conflict between emotions and reason. But when this poetry is read in a context, we come to know that the image of girl stands for nationalism, Ireland in the poetry of W.B. Yeats. So This poem gives another meaning where we see there is a conflict between uh, discursive politics and the ideal of the poet, that is his homeland, Ireland. And he thinks that he can learn wisdom from books of politics and experiences of statesmen, but it's his country which is dearer to him than any form of politics. So he cannot sacrifice his nation for the sake of any political compromise. So politics teaches pragmatic view, and pragmatic view demands that there should be some division and so on. But his love for nation inspires him to think that it should be above all. W.B. Yeats wrote verse drama as well as prose drama. One of his drama is Kathleen, and Kathleen is a character in play as well. Kathleen in his drama and poetry that also stands for Ireland. So we can say that that is an example of symbolic drama where the character of Kathleen stands for Ireland. So his poetry is interpreted in the light of Gair, his vision in Irish nationalism, and his without any context, just paying attention to the content of the poem. So poem politics can be enjoyed without any context. It can be understood in context of Irish nationalism, and it could be understood in the light of W.B. Yeats' Gair vision, according to which one idea is embedded in another. Politics is part of love, love is part of politics. W.B. Yeats' essay, My Grandfather, that also explores the childhood impressions, childhood fears, and you can say intricacies and intrigues of the mind when a child cannot share what actually he experiences. That also projects the character of William Polexfen, the maternal grandfather, as a symbol for family head of Ireland. So at one level, that is a typical Irish father who appears as a reserved, controlling, authoritative, soft at heart, man of principles. But that very particular experience of describing his own grandfather becomes representative of his Irish father, and also it becomes an image of father universally without any constraint of time and space. तो अक्सर जो बाप के कैरेक्टर कन्वेंशनल फैमिलीज में इसी तरह अस्यूम किए जाते थे, चाहे वो कोई इंडियन सोसाइटी है या मिडल ईस्टर्न है या अफ्रीकन है या यूरोपियन है.